How realistic is it that Eric Bieniemy becomes the next offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens? We talk about what he would bring to the Baltimore offensive system. Also talking more Lamar Jackson and also a couple of draft ideas for the Ravens coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in here to another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us today and making us your first listen on Locked On Ravens. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, including over on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And we're back here with former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and a Super Bowl champion, Qadry Ismail, talking all things Ravens and Q. I almost feel like I sound like a broken record. Offensive coordinator, talking Lamar Jackson. It's just those are the two biggest storylines, and things leak here and there about candidates for the offensive coordinator position and maybe stuff with Lamar's contract. But in this first segment, I want to start off with Eric Bieniemy in kind of that realistic option, because we've heard about a lot of candidates' names. But for Bieniemy, I think he'd be the most high-profile candidate out of them all right now.
I think so. I think the fact that he's been to multiple AFC championship games, he's been to the Super Bowl, he's obviously won it. The fact that you look at their offense and their style of offense under Patrick Mahomes and what the creativity that is kind of every week brought forth, it's just fitting. His mentor being Andy Reid to kind of hone his game and the adjustments of week to week and different defensive looks and everything. I think all of that adds up to a guy in Eric Bieniemy that could really, I think, be the catalyst that takes this offense to the next step. And we all know, obviously, number 8 in Lamar Jackson got to be the guy that has the ball in his hand and doing his thing. But make no mistake about it, I think with Eric Bieniemy, it would be a really good fit, coaching him and shaping the offense for what it needs to be as far as both run and pass and red zone.
Yeah, and I think, with what the Chiefs do over there with that offense, kind of like the Andy Reid West Coast system where, stuff derived from Bill Walsh and everything that he brought to the game. Is that your ideal offensive system for what you would want to see, whether it is Lamar or the next Ravens quarterback? Is that the next offensive system that you think would be ideal for what this Ravens team wants to do?
Yeah, I think the idea of the West Coast, that terminology, I guess I'm old enough now to say that, I remember when, and there's so many coaches that I had coach me who were from that West Coast style of offense. At the same time, as the years have gone on, it certainly has taken a life of its own. And now you have the different spin on the West Coast offense. The Schottenheimer way of doing things, the way in which you look at I guess you would call it a blend of the John Gruden, Andy Reid, the Marty Morningwigs. There are these different slants on it, and yet they all have this kind of West Coast appeal. But yet they are just different offenses, even though they look pretty much, the Gary Kubiak version of the West Coast offense. They have their own slants to them, and they've all grown to this different blend of, how do you put your own slant on it? And I think that's what you would see even Eric Bieniemy coming out of the shadow of an Andy Reid who was with Mike Holmgren and Mike Holmgren's style of West Coast offense. just so many coaches that have weaved through that coaching tree of the Bill Walsh West Coast offense. I'm sure they have, H drive, flanker drive, Z drive, which is similar to flanker drive, X drive, dagger routes, all the different variations of dagger and all of the things that they entail. Yeah, the way in which you see it being called and taken on its own personality.
Well, Q, you mentioned Gary Kubiak in there, and you signed me up for some Gary Kubiak. I mean, the zone scheme that they ran and all the zone runs, that was such a dominant offense back then. Obviously, probably not realistic because I don't think he's a candidate for anything, but it's interesting kind of just how much success they had with that system. And man, I do a lot to have that system back.
Here's the interesting thing about it, because we're talking about Gary Kubiak, but then you look at Mike Shanahan, who came from the pure West Coast offense, if you will. And then he made it into what Gary Kubiak had as far as, the stretch zone scheme and the theory of expanding angles. But then you look at Alex Gibb, the offensive line coach, and what he brought to the table. At the same time, Kyle Shanahan, and how Kyle Shanahan kind of under the tutelage of his dad and what he saw as a coordinator and making the stretch zone scheme his, and how that all just came about. And then it came into this blending, if you will. So, hey, I'm all for, all of it. If Kubiak's imprint is somewhere in the lexicon of the run game and the way in which it's called, and all the things of bootlegs and naked boots and waggle passes, but then have its own little West Coast slant to it. All of it, I'm here for it all. I think the bottom line is there needs to be that fresh idea, and I think the Ravens certainly are taking their time going for it. And if Eric Bieniemy, because of him being in a Super Bowl, is why they're taking their time, so be it.
Yeah, and I think with Bieniemy in particular, he is someone that it would be well worth the wait, in my opinion. And I know, Q, there have been some concerns about, well, again, how much of the offense is actually Bieniemy, how much of it is Andy Reid, how much of it is Patrick Mahomes. I think Bieniemy's done enough to be deserving of head coaching opportunities right now, which I know he's been in consideration for the Indy job and has had interviews over the last couple of seasons. But does it concern you at all, kind of, I guess, the uncertainty of how much of the play calling duties fall on Bieniemy and how much of it could be someone else and maybe not what Bieniemy does?
So I think from a narrative of black coaches having to go overboard to be recognized, I think he falls directly in that category. We've seen coaches who weren't coordinators become head coaches. We've seen, heck, even John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh had no play calling experience, no head coaching experience. He was a special teams coordinator, and he led men and knew how to lead men. Now he's a head coach, Super Bowl champion head coach. Nick Sirianni, same thing. He's playing for a Super Bowl championship. I think calling plays, there's a strong level of him, meaning Eric Bieniemy, being knee deep in it and doing it. And so why don't we just leave it there, as opposed to trying to make it about, oh my God, he didn't. There's so many guys that I've seen over the years who have gotten shots and opportunities, to call plays, but now all of a sudden Eric Bieniemy can't, and I think that's really sad and unfortunate that keeps on being pushed out there.
Well, and I think to your point about guys who don't necessarily have experience, I think the one A I look to there is Jeff Saturday who literally got the call from the Colts and was like, oh, all right, I guess we're doing this thing. And literally no coaching experience, college or NFL level. He becomes the interim over there in Indianapolis. So, I mean, me personally, I'd be over the moon if Eric Bieniemy was able to become the offensive coordinator, because I think it's such a steal to the point where he deserves to be a head coach right now. Like, I think he is qualified to be a head coach right now. But if the Ravens are get him as an offensive coordinator, that's my 1A. That's where I'm going. But Q, how realistic is it, do you think, that this would happen? That Bieniemy, he's on a 1-year contract, so his contract is up after the Super Bowl. How realistic is it you think he makes a lateral move to maybe get out of Andy Reid's shadow? Or do you think that he just goes back to Kansas City and runs it back if there's no head coaching opportunity available?
Well, I think the coaching opportunities, as far as the Rooney Rule and all the things, I mean, as a Black coach, you got to take every opportunity you can. It's not fair, but it's what it is. It's also unfortunate that, you see so many times other guys get chance after chance after chance, or you see guys that are nowhere near as qualified as you getting a chance. Is it a lateral move? That's going to be something where Steve Bisciotti is going to have to, in my mind, show him via the purse strings that it isn't a lateral move, and pay him handsomely, pay him the deserving of, the position that he's earned. He's earned the right to be in this conversation, unlike others. And so I think if, he is in this position, pay him accordingly. He's absolutely deserving of it. And then at the same time, yeah, it's his prerogative if he feels there's a head coaching opportunity out there, and in that head coaching opportunity, then he wants to explore it. Indianapolis seems to keep coming up as a name that could potentially, be a good fit for him and them. Then that'd be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and for me, I think for Baltimore, in terms of whether this is realistic, I think it's 50-50, because obviously if the head coaching job is there, I'm sure, and I think he should take that because he's earned that. But at the same time, it just depends what Bieniemy wants. If he really feels like the best path for him is maybe unfair as it is for him to have to go out of Andy Reid's shadow, if that's the best path that he believes is what he needs to do, then maybe a Baltimore or a Washington is pretty realistic. And that could happen, because I still think Baltimore's offensive coordinator position is the most attractive option on the market. And coming up in the second segment, we'll be talking about that, Lamar Jackson, and so much more. So be sure to stay tuned. So a lot to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode brought to you by Blue Nile, and Valentine's Day is coming up, which means romance is in the air more than usual. And I don't need to tell everybody that. You've probably had your date plans on the calendar for weeks, right? But have you found the perfect Valentine's Day gift yet? That is the question. Whether you're celebrating the day of romance or whether you're ready to pop the question, you can find Julie as unique as she is with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. At BlueNile.com, you can find the perfect piece of jewelry for life special moments, or even create the custom engagement ring of her dreams. There's simple online tools that you choose a diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft the perfect piece to your specifications. Blue Nile provides expert guidance, in-depth education materials, and unique online tools to place you in control, so you can forget the usual hassles of the jewelry shopping process and focus on the romance. Blue Nile's diamond price guarantee allows you to compare a competitor's diamond against one of theirs. Blue Nile can even meet or beat their price. Every order is insured and arrives quickly in discreet packaging. They won't give away what's inside. Shipping is free, and so are the returns. Right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com for the 50% off. BlueNile.com. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And this year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And we're really excited about a new sports betting partner for Locked On, because that's the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. And for me, the Super Bowl, the money line is still probably going to be moving up until kickoff, so I'm going to be locked into the FanDuel Sportsbook app on that. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, it's super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. And the app is really user-friendly. It makes for a very user-friendly experience, which I really like. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more a FanDuel official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail and Q. We just talked a bit about Eric Bieniemy and, how realistic it is that he would actually come to Baltimore and be Baltimore's offensive coordinator in a lateral move. Kansas City's offense, that offensive coordinator position, super attractive, right? Yeah, Patrick Mahomes and all these weapons and a successful offense there. But in terms of the openings that are available right now in this very moment, I know a lot of people were talking about between Baltimore and Los Angeles, the Chargers, which of those was more attractive to candidates. I think with Los Angeles off the board, I think it's by far and away the Ravens at number one, but I think a lot of that maybe hinges to a Lamar Jackson. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from an organizational standpoint, you're not going to find a better organization, a better run organization. There's a tremendous amount of respect there that I think I've experienced it personally. I've also seen other guys come in and go. I've seen coaches come and go. They have nothing but positive things to say about the organization. I think Steve Bisciotti, is a hands-off owner. He will give advice if need be, but he's not necessarily going to insert his opinion. Obviously, everybody has to go down to Jupiter and have the talk in the principal's office, if you will. But going back to the days of Ozzie and Brian Billick and the way in which Art Modell ran the organization to present day, and the way Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh and Eric DaCosta, I think they do a phenomenal job of open line of communication, open line of thought. The desire to win is priority number one, and the desire to win well as far as the character and the way in which you treat one another with the professionalism of things. It's just I've seen some other organizations that you feel like, oh boy, I don't know what's going on. So yeah, this is a crown jewel, if you will, type of an organization, and I could see where coaches would desire to come here and coach.
Yeah, I think it's a super attractive opening, but I do think a lot of it hinges to Lamar Jackson. Now, I think organizationally, whether Lamar is there or not, it is still an attractive organization to come and coach for. But an offense with Lamar Jackson versus without Lamar Jackson, there's just an element there that you don't get when he's not there. So if you were an offensive coordinator, Q, how attractive is the opening to you with Lamar Jackson? And then how much of a drop-off is there in attractiveness if Lamar is not the quarterback next year?
So I think the fact that you have a generational talent at your disposal to, further him along in his career speaks volumes. I think at the same time, if you look at what happens when you got a rookie quarterback, there's an unknown factor there. There's getting to know him. Sure, you can, do your due diligence and all that, but you really don't know how he's going to react. So there's a known versus an unknown. There is the playoffs. There is the Super Bowl. There's all those factors of a young team. There's a small window of opportunity that you can have. And right now the Ravens are smack dab in the middle of that opportunity. So I think when it comes to the bigger picture, I think for Lamar Jackson, that's where it's more coveted because of the fact that he's just an awesome known commodity compared to if you have, somebody who you just don't know. You don't know if he's going to turn out to be Lamar Jackson or Mitch Trubisky. You roll the dice. And I think that's something that, are you a Blake Bortles guy, or are you going to go out there and be a franchise MVP, league MVP, and be competing for a potential world championship?
Yeah, and something I've been saying all week, Q, is Lamar Jackson is a franchise quarterback, whether it's for the Ravens or somebody else. There would be teams, if the Ravens decide to move on, teams will be lining up out the door to get a player like Lamar Jackson onto their franchise. I think he gives you the most realistic chance of winning. And I'm not saying the Ravens will never win without him, because obviously if he's a Raven for life, he's going to retire at some point. But I just think for what you have, you understand that he is a generational talent, like you said, and he's one of one. He is Lamar Jackson. Is there room for improvement? Sure, absolutely. We saw some deep ball accuracy drop off. I know the injuries have been disappointing over the last couple of seasons. I'm not labeling him as injury prone yet. I'm not on that bandwagon. But at the same time, I just think he's a known commodity for an offensive coordinator coming in. He'd be like, all right, yeah, that Lamar Jackson is my quarterback and I can kind of work with this. But if it's a rookie, there is that level of unknown factor. But speaking of this whole situation, this whole saga with Lamar Jackson, boy, did he make waves on Wednesday night by posting on Instagram. He had purple clothes on, right? A Ravens shirt, I think it was, a shield chain that's like in the shape of the Ravens shield and a little Baltimore B on there. And then in one of them, he had a bag in it. And the reactions to it, I talked about it on yesterday's show. Mm-hmm. Some people were saying, oh my God, the deal is done, hang it up. And then others are saying, what are you talking about? It's just an Instagram post. I said, it's kind of funny, the timing of it, but I wouldn't read too much into it. But what do you think?
No, I think there's something to be said about it because of the fact that when you look at today's athlete, they are so tied into their social media. Being tied into your social media, part of it is how clever can I be about my situation without necessarily talking about my situation. So there must have been a speeding up of the process, and there must have been some positive headway that he's giving hope to. So there's the positive giving headway to that. And so how do you interpret that? Well, I interpret that as a positive for us, the fan base, wondering whether or not a deal will get done, because we've also seen the opposite. What's the opposite? Scrub the account. You no longer have it. You're sitting back. You're like, okay, he had X, Y, and Z highlight up. Now he has nothing, not really affiliating himself with the team. Kyler Murray comes to mind as he was pouting about him not getting whatever. And so that's the athlete that we see today. Lamar's no different. He's in that genre of guys. And I could see where he's showing his cleverness of posting. That's a good sign, I think.
Yeah, I think it is definitely a positive. I'm not going to run to the press and say the deal is done. Lamar posted on Instagram, it's over. But I agree with you in the fact that, I don't think it meant nothing. Like, I don't think he sat there and looked at these pictures and said, oh yeah, like it doesn't mean a thing, where, maybe it doesn't mean a lot, but maybe it does. And so it's fun to kind of speculate because we don't know, maybe there'll be a 30 for 30 about Lamar and we'll talk about that post and be like, yeah, I was sending a message, or no, people just overreacted. So again, we got to wait and see. The Ravens organization, Lamar, super tight-lipped about the whole thing. I mean, I've been going back to the Marquise Brown trade where no one knew about that deal. Everybody seemed to be flabbergasted by what that deal was. But coming up in our final segment, we'll be talking about a 30 for 30. The Bullies of Baltimore will get Q's reaction on everything, looking at his cameos in the film and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a lot to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by TurboTax. You go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack moving boxes of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes lullaby. Even hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. Or TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. It feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax to learn more into it. TurboTax will service products only. Video meetings will actually does your taxes required. See guarantees, details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher is still here with Qadry Ismail and Q. A couple of ways I want to take this third segment here. First, I want to ask you about some draft ideas for the Ravens, and then I want to get a little bit into the 30 for 30 documentary Bullies of Baltimore. So let's start off with the draft ideas. There have been a couple of CBS sports mock drafts, and mock drafts are always fun. And a bunch of different prospects, bunch of different ideas. And there are two I've talked about over the course of the last couple of weeks. One is the Ravens had pick 22. One of them is the Ravens taking Texas running back Bijan Robinson in that spot. The other is Baltimore taking quarterback Anthony Richardson out of Florida in that spot, with the caveat that the Ravens actually franchise tag Lamar, have Lamar on the roster for $45 million plus a first-round rookie quarterback. Are either of those ideas enticing to you, or would you rather go a different direction?
Bijan Robinson is legit. And the running back position, there is a ton of wear and tear real quick. We saw it clearly with our two dudes, but then you look at the Super Bowl participant and what is it? I don't remember what round Sanders was drafted in, but I do know the running back, and excuse me, it slips my brain.
Pacheco from the Chiefs?
Yeah, Pacheco. Thank you. Pacheco, I think he was what, 6th round or something, or later?
He was 7th.
7th. Thank you. 7th. There you go. Bruh. Bijan Robinson. Pacheco. Bijan Robinson. More money. Pacheco. Not so much more money. I think there's a lot of talent at the running back position, and it's the easiest one to be able to do what you do. Now, you were saying as far as the quarterback from Florida, tell me his name again.
Yeah, Anthony Richardson. Whether Baltimore, if they draft him in this situation, they'd have both Lamar and a rookie quarterback, first rounder on the roster.
Yeah, Richardson, I think the thing for him, he's such a unique talent, very similar, not equal to Lamar, but he has to figure out his upside. I think that would be intriguing of the two between him and Bijan, but I'll pass on both. Give me a receiver and keep moving it forward.
Yeah, receiver, corner, maybe even edge help, defensive line.
Receiver, corner, no edge help. We already got it. D-line, absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe guard, maybe even a guard if Ben Powers walks. But maybe you put Ben Cleveland in there and you feel confident enough in what you have.
I think you go later round for a guard. Unless that guard is Marshall Yanda 2.0, I think you go for a later round when it comes to just the bigger picture of a guard just isn't a first round guy.
Hey, they did Ben Grubbs all those years ago out of Auburn. That was
they did
2006, 2008, 2007. One of those mid 2000 drafts. So he was good for a couple of years, but I think for me, receiver, corner are probably my biggest two in the first, especially because Baltimore doesn't have a second this year. So if you trade back and you pick up a late first and a second, that's probably option number one. But I just think for what the Ravens have positional need wise, especially if Lamar signs an extension, or especially if he's on the franchise tag, you have to hit on your draft picks. And for needs, wide receiver and corner are the top two, definitely. But Q 30 for 30 came out last Sunday. Bullies of Baltimore, you had a couple of appearances in there, as you remember that 2000 Super Bowl team. I mean, how did you think that, we had Ken and Jason, the co-directors, on here last week. How do you think Ken and Jason did putting the whole story of that team together? And were you happy with how many cameos you had over the course of the film? Did you want more? Did you want less? Did you see yourself enough in there?
Well, first of all, I wasn't necessarily, consulted at all, and the guys they had who they had and all that. I think there would have been some unique perspective that I could have brought to the table with Trent Dilfer and everything. Obviously Jamal, he's his own right and own man and more than well deserving of being on there. I think at the same time, yeah, the first cameo, I was like, no. It was the game against Jacksonville, and I vividly remember the play call. It was a stutter go, and just the way Tony Banks and I had previously been on the same page, and that was one of the misses that I just was like frustrated with my own self. And then they showed some other plays that Trent and I connected on, and clearly those were touchdowns, and they were awesome and all that. Man, it would have been great to have been there, more reliable for Tony, but then also it kind of flashed me back to, why they benched Tony, and he was my guy. I mean, he in my mind, I thought I could get back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, but unfortunately, I tore my MCL, and I really struggled. As a matter of fact, that game against Jacksonville now was one of the things. Like, people maybe nowadays people know a little bit more as far as injuries, and again the ability to be on social media and kind of express yourself to the fans a little bit more. But I know for me, my MCL sprain, that was the first, game that I went out there and didn't have my leg wrapped. And it felt good. It felt strong, but I wasn't really quite the same the way I knew I could be with my kinesthetic awareness. And, make no excuses. It was what it was. But everything else, from the way in which I saw Tony Siragusa, who, it broke me a little bit, but made me think of all the fond memories, because all of the times that I remember him coming up to me after all my successes, it really meant a lot. He was awesome. And it was cool seeing a young Ray Lewis talk about, and I vividly remember going up in front of the team, talk about wanting to go down to Tampa. And we went on that path to go to Tampa. It was something special. So there was a lot of other stories there. Clearly, it was slanted towards, the defense, and just an amazing defense, all-time best defense ever. And I love how they they showed Corey Dillon quitting, because Corey Dillon, Jerome Bettis, Eddie George, and Fred Taylor. And then we had Eric Rett, who was a former guy in '99 for us, but Eric was with the Cleveland Browns, and he wasn't necessarily on those other guys' level. But that was a murderer's row of running backs. Think about it. They did not have collectively 1,000 yards. Like, oh my God, that blows me away. So, yeah, that's something where you see the bigger picture of just how incredibly dominant that defense was. So, loved every bit of the 30 for 30. It was cool to see that. Even you couldn't do it nowadays, but even the way Goose was, and he landed on Rich Gannon.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize how, like, the ball was gone. He tackled him and walked. I mean, he probably would have been ejected from the game. Probably would have had, man, I mean, I guess he had a $10,000 fine after he was saying Phil Simms complained, but he would have had even a greater fine. And Phil Simms did our Super Bowl, and I remember him just busting on Phil. Was like, all right, bet. I got some guys who's going to do some landscaping. Watch what's going to happen. And I was like, oh my. So it was just hilarious, some of the back and forth of Goose that, we didn't see necessarily on that 30 for 30. But Brian Billick, man, from when he and I were in Minnesota to him being the head coach, and man, I mean, just an awesome head coach. It was unfortunate that he kind of, his ego ultimately was his undoing, as the team kind of, grew into this, the egos on the team on the defensive side of the ball, and just some of the ways in which he kind of lost touch with the guys, but that's what Steve Bisciotti, is well documented and saying. I remember interviewing him a couple times and talking about it, and so be it. But loved him in 2000, 99, 2000, 2001. My tenure in Baltimore was special. Loved the 30 for 30.
Yeah, It was great. And right along your point, I mean, the way the defense played, I tweeted it out. There would be like lifelong bans and suspensions and all these big money fines for everything that deep. I mean, you measured it. They made guys quit on the field. Like they were that awful to play against for other teams where it was that dominant and everything came together. The story, I know Tony told it where, pretty much Brian Billick had the schedule from that day till the parade in Tampa, and everyone was like, Goose said, "Oh my God!" Like I didn't even expect that was going to happen. So so I mean, there was the perspective. I mean, there was the shot of you and Brian Billick absolutely losing it at the Tim Johnson skit when there was "I want my restitution" and that whole famous thing. So I think a great job, and I'm glad you yourself enjoyed it, Q. It makes me happy to hear. But that's all I have for you today, Q, on Locked On Ravens. I appreciate you coming on, and again, hopefully next week we'll see some sort of movement. We'll know who wins the Super Bowl. That's a start. And I think that really it's the signal that the offseason's really begun once that game ends.
Yeah, I mean, the Super Bowl wraps everything up. The league year, as far as the culmination of our great game of football, our grand event, it's going to be done. And I guess because of Jalen Hurts, that's where I hope, the Lombardi will reside. So I'm going to keep it on the East Coast. Jalen Hurts, going to go for him and root for the Eagles.
All right, is that your prediction? You got the Eagles winning, or you think it's going to be the Chiefs?
I got the Eagles winning. I think that will be pretty cool. And hoping that Jalen Hurts will because of his redemption story, and it'll be a fine fitting to his career and kind of just keep on. Obviously, from this point forward, he'll be a Super Bowl champion, and that's something that you can never take away from him.
Yeah, all right. No reverse jinxes this time. We're real prediction this time. Eagles winning. No reverse jinxes. We'll see what happens. So I think it's going to be a good game regardless of what happens. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm going to get back on Monday. It is more Ravens talk and officially the start of the offseason. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you right back here on Monday.